J. Today we're going to be finishing up our discussion on fragrance terminology. I hope the last video was helpful. I'm going to put a link to it if you haven't seen it down in the description box. And I hope this one is helpful to you as well. The first two terms we're going to be discussing, I wasn't sure if you could use them interchangeably. I've heard people use them in the same way for the same process, but I wasn't sure what the right term was to use. So I'm glad that I could look them up, and I'm glad that I learned something, and I'm glad that I can present it to you. And again, I'll put all of my resources, all of my links in the description box, okay? So the first two terms are maceration versus maturation. And it's been described as how a fragrance ages over time. And looking at both of the definitions and learning what they both mean, neither one is necessarily wrong. What it is just the order of the process, okay? So the first term, maceration, it actually has two meanings, so I'll go over that. Maceration, the first meaning is when a flower, specifically a flower, is soaked in oil, an oil solution, and the oil solution is able to allow the flower to extract or to release its scent, and so that becomes the fragrant oil. I learned that is expensive and it's time consuming, maybe labor intensive is probably more what they said, and so it's not used that much anymore. So it's really something that is an old process. But what is the most relevant to what I just said in the intro is maceration is when you have your fragrance oil composition, so the way that the perfumer wants the fragrance to smell, and you have the carrier, which is the alcohol or the alcohol mixed with the water. They are both put together, and the maceration process is when that composition, when they're both put together and left to age over a period of time. I don't know what the X is. I don't know what the period of time is. But yeah, so maturation is similar to that. It's just a different order. So the fragrant oil has already been put together by the perfumer, and it itself is supposed to be left to age over a period of time before it's even added to the carrier. And so I think that may be where the differences or where the carryover is when people are talking about maceration versus maturation. So maturation happens first. It's the fragrance oil composition needs to age before it's added to the carrier. Maceration is when it's added to the carrier, when they're mixed together and they're left to age again. So what I also learned is that in each of these time frames, some of the aging is not done when there is a time constraint put on the company. So I guess if they're trying to put out a lot of fragrances or whatever the case may be, they may not go through these processes of aging. And so I wonder if that has something to do with the way that we perceive our fragrances after we have already bought them. I think it definitely does, because I have a fragrance. It's Raja Dove 51. I was so happy to get that fragrance. It was expensive, but I got it at a good price. When I sprayed it, I could not smell it. I was searching, trying to get whiffs of it through the air, and it was so faint. I felt like I had to catch it. And I was frustrated. I was angry. I put it away. It's been sitting in my closet for about 8 or 9 months. I've taken it out a few times here and there just to see if anything is different. And it really didn't change until I took it out recently, just recently, really, a few days ago, because I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with it, whether I was going to keep it or whether I was going to sell it or give it away even, see if someone else could smell it. But I can smell it now. And given that it's not a beast mode fragrance, I'm still getting to know it because I just am able to smell it. I'm just happy about that. But it's not the way that it was before. And I don't know if it normally takes 8 or 9 months. It's been that long. Or if it's supposed to happen sooner, I'm not sure. But I know that something has changed with that fragrance that I can tell just a few days ago. So I know that I wonder if that happened to that fragrance. Have you guys had any experience with not being able to smell a fragrance very well when you first get it, and having it sit for a little while and then it coming through stronger? If you have, go ahead and put that in the comments because I'm curious about that for sure. Um, the next term is evaporation, and that can have an effect on the fragrance's performance as well. I think this generally happens to fragrances that have been used a lot or over a longer period of time. I don't think 8 or 9 months is long enough to see a lot of evaporation from a fragrance, given that I'm not sure, I haven't checked when that fragrance was made. But still, I think it takes longer than that for a fragrance to experience enough evaporation to affect the actual concentration of the oils. Evaporation is when the water and the alcohol or both evaporate and leaves a more of a concentration of the fragrance oil, which would in theory make it stronger. So again, I think that happens to fragrances that have had a long life and a lot of use. So that is evaporation. The next definition is pillar. So a pillar fragrance is a fragrance that is a new creation by a house. For example, Lancôme Tresor is a pillar fragrance. A flanker is a variation of that pillar. So they're either going to add some notes or take some notes away from the pillar fragrance to give us a new variation or a new fragrance. But it definitely should have some similarity in smell to the pillar fragrance. Sometimes the flankers don't smell anything like the pillar. That's not the norm, but it does happen. And it's definitely the choice of the house and the perfumer. Another term is the nose. The nose is the perfumer. It is the artist of the fragrance. So they have to have a degree in perfume. They have to have a degree in chemistry or cosmetic science. That way they understand what the molecules do, when they mix together, and also, of course, all the different scents and things like that. So I'm not sure if they actually, put the aroma chemicals together, or if someone else does that job, and if the perfumer just does the mixing. Not sure, but that is the nose, the artist of the fragrance. Okay, so the artist will create for different settings. There is a niche setting, niche houses. So niche houses, they create fragrances that are supposed to be unique. Well, let me say, they only create fragrances. That is the definition of a niche house. But I think the appeal of a niche house, because they only create fragrances, they can spend their money on more unique offerings. They don't necessarily have to be unique. All niche fragrances are not unique. All niche fragrances are not expensive. They tend to be more expensive because they can spend more money, I think, on their ingredients and their packaging and things like that, because again, fragrance is their focus. There are some niche brands that are dupe houses. Dupe is another term. It means it's a copy or an interpretation of a fragrance that is already out on the market. They might do it for a cheaper price. But some dupe houses can be niche fragrance houses as well. But yeah, there are some niche fragrances that smell very appealing. They might appeal to everybody. So that is niche. It is a house that creates only fragrance. So designer is a house that already has some products in place. They might sell clothing, handbags, shoes, beauty products, but they tend to be a bigger, more established company, and they add fragrance to it. And so when you already have an established base, this is just my thought, and I think it's correct. But it seems like they want to create fragrances that appeal to everybody who's already buying their products. And so mass appealing is another term. That means it appeals to the masses. Everybody will like it. And so sometimes people think mass appealing is a bad thing. Generic is a term that is thrown around. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that it's easy to like. And sometimes we need those perfumes in our collections. And if we're not a collector and you're just worried about smelling good, you want to just smell nice, having something that's easy to reach for and easy to like is definitely not a bad thing. So mass appealing is not a bad thing. It just means that it's a composition that appeals to a lot of different people. Okay. And so the next term I want to talk about is these two go together. There's olfactive fatigue. That's a short-term loss of smell or sensitivity to a fragrance. That happens in our daily life, I think, as we spray with some fragrances. Over time, I, as well as other people, I'm sure it's happened to everybody, and not able to smell my fragrance either as strongly as I did when I first sprayed it or at all as the day goes on. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not there. I've definitely had fragrances on that I couldn't smell that I've gotten compliments on. So that is my olfactive fatigue. Nose blind is another term. But all you have to do is just kind of re-up, respray later in the day, maybe the next day, and you'll get the full effect of the fragrance again. What I did learn is that olfactive fatigue, if it's over a long period of time, you're using one fragrance, it can actually lead to a term called it's anosmic. You are anosmic to a fragrance. That means that you can't smell it or you smell it faintly. This can actually happen to people who have a signature scent, which is interesting. Signature scent is another term. That means you only use one fragrance, or you mostly use one fragrance, and you are known for that fragrance. So that is your signature. When you walk by, if I had a signature scent, oh my goodness, if I had a signature scent and I walked by someone, they would say, Jay, I know Jay was here because X scent is here. Okay, so that's signature scent. But yeah, over time, using the same fragrance can make you less sensitive to it to a point where you can't smell it anymore. Just like a smoker, they can't always, somebody who's smoked for a long time can't smell the smoke around them. They can't smell that their car smells like smoke. They can't smell that their home might smell like smoke. And so that is the same thing. It's the same effect. It's called being anosmic. So what can happen is that if you remove that fragrance and even the notes, stop using any fragrance that may have the same notes as that fragrance you're anosmic to, over a period of time, you can get that sense of smell back. It's not a permanent thing. It's a more serious thing. What can be more permanent when we're talking about being anosmic to a smell is if you just can't smell a molecule in general. For example, I have a hard time picking up synthetic woody molecules. I get them kind of in wafts around me, but I definitely don't get them consistently, and I don't sense them as strongly as I do other notes. Okay. Let's see, what other definitions that I want to talk about? Reformulation. I want to talk about reformulation. It seems to be something that is frustrating to people who have already been presented with a product. They already have a fragrance that they love. They're used to it. And so for reasons sometimes out of the company's control, there are different reasons for a reformulation, but a reformulation is when a company has to change the composition of a fragrance that they have already created. Reasons could be because the material, like it could even be one material in the composition is not available anymore. There's a governing body of the fragrance industry. It's called the IFRA. They determine what's safe to put in fragrances, and sometimes they find that raw materials can be allergens to people, whether it be like a skin rash when you put it on your skin, or possible triggers to asthma or allergic reactions. And if that happens to enough people, they'll say that it's not safe to put in a fragrance and a company won't have access to it anymore. Um, in that same way. So what happens a lot of times is that synthetic molecules are created to mimic the natural ingredient. And sometimes the company will say, we don't want to use synthetic molecules. And sometimes the synthetic molecule is expensive and the company can't afford to buy it. And so they'll have to, you know, put you, they'll have to compose the fragrance in a different way. So there are a lot of different reasons for reformulations. And those are just some of them. But I think the companies do, and sometimes they just don't want to pay because it's expensive. But for the most part, I think that they try to do the best that they can with what they have. And sometimes they have to sacrifice the longevity of a fragrance. Sometimes they have to sacrifice the scent because, again, if you don't have the same ingredients, it's harder to make something exactly like you made before. So that is reformulation. Let's see. I'm just gonna make sure I got everything. Niche and designer, pillar, and yeah. So that's it. Those are all of my terms that I wanted to talk with you guys about. And hopefully they will help you understand your fragrance videos better. I guess that's all for today. Thanks for watching. Love, Jay. Bye-bye.